Lembremos que essa força marada não lhe construiu um tema em cozinha, bem.
Things didn't look good for the horror genre for a while not too long ago, but horror games are now stronger perhaps than they have ever been. Indies and major AAA developers alike are brimming with creativity and new ideas, and we get to experience new, fascinatingly unique and unsettling games on a regular basis. Mundaun by Hidden Fields is yet another game that joins that growing list of games that have come out of nowhere. Give it even a single glance, and it will grab your attention. And though inconsistencies here and there might prove a little frustrating, the game on the whole is still one that's worth experiencing. A quick note before we move forward. Please consider subscribing and enable all notifications by clicking the bell icon to get new video updates. And while you're at it, please click like if you enjoyed this video. It really helps us out. With that out of the way, let's begin. In Mundaun, you play as a young man who travels to a remote village in the Swiss Alps after receiving word of his grandfather's death. And quickly upon arrival, you realize that things are not what they seem. The circumstances surrounding his death are mysterious. The town itself is eerily desolate. Its residents are acting strange, and it's clear that somehow a malevolent, evil power is either responsible for all of this, or is at least heavily involved. Your grandfather, a former soldier who fought in a bloody war, had something in his past that is connected to what's going on, and you slowly learn new bits and pieces of information about that past, which in turn helps defog the game's central mystery. The core narrative setup is an engaging one. It's not particularly unique, and the story that plays out is largely straightforward, but all of that works in the game's favor. It feels focused and tight, and rather than trying to wow you with dramatic twists and long-winding revelations, Mundaun instead chooses to put all of its energy into telling a relatively narrow story, and telling it well. It's not the most incredible tale that's ever been spun in a game, but it does its job, especially since what the game is really focusing on first and foremost is not storytelling, but atmosphere. And when it comes to atmosphere, Mundaun is a great accomplishment. The titular village of Mundaun is a creepy place. It's sparsely populated, its denizens are usually seen off in the distance, both moving and talking weird. At night, strange creatures roam the hilly environments silently, and the mountains throw looming shadows against the pale moonlight, while during the day, everything looks bleak and washed out. All of this is accompanied by solid music, which strikes that perfect balance between being just good enough to be noticeable, but never so dramatic or so full of flourishes that it overpowers a scene. The lion's share of the work being done in the atmosphere department, and most other departments if I'm being honest, is by the game's gorgeous art style. Every object, every person, every texture you see in the game was drawn by a pencil before it was imported into a software, and it looks great, lending the game an impressionistic beauty that shies away from giving anything too much detail. The aesthetic that this achieves gels with Mundaun's tone and atmosphere perfectly. You never quite feel like you're in a real place or talking to real people. It all feels unsettlingly ethereal, and I doubt that the game would have been able to achieve that with any other kind of visual style. Where Mundaun is far more inconsistent is the gameplay department. Most of the focus here is on exploring your surroundings, looking for items and objects, and then figuring out where those items need to be used. There's a little bit of combat and stealth peppered in here and there, but largely the game puts most of its emphasis on puzzle solving and exploration. For the most part, that works well within Mundaun's framework. The story in this game is a slow burn, so it makes sense that the gameplay takes its time with things as well. The puzzles too are largely well designed, if not spectacular, and do a good job of keeping you engaged for the most part. The issue arises when the game is a bit too vague about what it wants you to do. Early on in the game, for instance, you're told to light a candle on a windowsill in your grandfather's old house. But there are multiple windowsills, and I spent a good 5 to 10 minutes lighting and relighting a candle on the wrong one, wondering why the game wasn't progressing forward, even though I thought I had done what it wanted me to do. Often you're told to open locked doors, which more often than not involves a lot of trial and error, as you try using every key in your inventory to see what works, since the game's inventory doesn't have any descriptive text for any of the items. Then there are other moments where the criteria for progressing is a bit too specific or arbitrary. like looking at a specific distant figure or talking to a person twice before the game removes an invisible wall in front of a gaping exit. One-off instances like these are not uncommon in any game, but they crop up in Mundaun with more regularity than they should, which hurt the pacing of the gameplay and in turn, the story's progression. Meanwhile, the combat and stealth are also largely disappointing. Combat in this game is heavily de-emphasized, but even if it weren't, I wouldn't have recommended engaging with it, given how clunky it can feel. Stealth, meanwhile, is serviceable but often feels too low stakes, which can take away from the otherwise solid atmosphere and tension that the game keeps building up. Owing to its very nature, Mundaun might not be a game that everyone can enjoy. It likes to take its time with things. It can often be a bit too opaque. And if you're looking for a blockbuster visual experience with cutting-edge graphics and shiny reflections and large puddles on the ground, well, you're not going to find that here. What this is a unique, unsettling experience, one that tells a solid story that is rife with spooky entities and hellish nightmares. The pencil-drawn art style is also absolutely gorgeous and gives the game a very unique, very distinct identity. And even through occasional moments of frustration brought about with gameplay issues, I felt compelled to keep pushing forward. There's something here that horror enthusiasts will definitely enjoy. And even though it might not be everyone's favorite horror experience of all time, Mundaun is still a game that deserves your attention, at least for one playthrough. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.